this is not going to go the way you think.
How you get so big that you hold up this kind?
Alright, I'm just gonna come right out and say it. The Empire Strikes Back is the worst Star Wars movie. And now that I got a lot of you hot and bothered, I'm gonna tell you why it's the worst Star Wars movie. This is my one-sentence explanation. The Empire Strikes Back is the only Star Wars film that in its entirety is well written, well acted, well crafted, and just altogether well done. In short, The Empire Strikes Back is the only good Star Wars movie, and that's what makes it the worst Star Wars movie. Okay, clickbait done and out of the way, let's just talk for a second. We all rank Star Wars films. We all have our favorite and our least favorite, and it makes for great discussion. It's a really good jumping off point when you meet new fans to go, well, what one's your favorite, and how do you feel about this one? And it's just natural in a series to want to compare them and see which ones speak to you more than others. It's all in fun, until it's not all in fun. Sometimes what happens is we pick a movie and we put it on a pedestal, and then we make it the standard. Firstly, the standard shouldn't be what we put on the pedestal, because if we make perfection the standard, then what we actually do is make perfect average. Although that's kind of a different discussion for a different day. But I'd like to note that everything being the perfect thing is a demand that's destined to be unfulfilled. So needing every new Star Wars film to be the best one, or else it's terrible, is just a mindset that's setting you up to be disappointed no matter what. Secondly, in anticipation of your counter to my firstly, I'd like to say that it's a false binary to say that just because something isn't perfect, it's therefore terrible. There are so many more things on heaven and earth than best or terrible. It's possible for something to be great, or just kind of okay, or kind of meh, to be honest. When I say stop expecting every film to be the best one ever, I'm not saying don't have standards. That is the farthest thing from what I'm saying. What I'm saying is don't have standards that are rigged. And don't be fooled into having standards that are rigged just because that's what other people say. So with that, let's get back to the topic at hand. Why The Empire Strikes Back is the worst Star Wars movie. Let's look at some common critiques for the franchise. Poor writing, poor character development, poor pacing, poor acting, and bad side plots. These are very common complaints. In fact, they are so common in Star Wars they can be said about every single Star Wars film. Except, can you guess? That's right, The Empire Strikes Back. Empire has amazing writing, thorough character development that's well set up, it jumps around to different stories in a way that's cohesive, and it has some of the best acting moments in the saga. I mean, how dare they ruin Star Wars by making Empire completely unlike any other Star Wars movie I've seen? It's really #not my Star Wars unless there's this.
I don't like sand.
Or this.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
I feel like people have Empire as just kind of this standard in their head, and they never actually bother to watch any of the other Star Wars films, and therefore don't realize that Empire is the outlier, and that there's no bad side plots because there's basically no plot at all. I mean, seriously, the most plotty part of the film is the Battle of Hoth, and that's like the first 10 minutes of the movie. It's also the only point where the Empire actually strikes back. And what's even gained? Most of the rebels are alive, Vader managed to capture only one guy, and Luke talked to a frog for a while. And think about it, what really was the plot of The Empire Strikes Back? And I am not slamming the movie. Empire is amazing. It is a well-made movie that absolutely deserves its place in film history and deserves the praise it gets. What it does do is prove that a movie doesn't really have to be about anything for it to be something amazing and something that speaks to people. Okay, so where does that leave us? What was the point of this whole shebang? Well, hopefully you know that my rant here can be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt. I don't actually think there's a worst Star Wars film. I don't like to think of Star Wars in that way. I do think that Empire is a unique installment to the saga. And if you want to think of it as one of these things is not like the other, anytime you have one movie like that, it's possible for that one movie that's kind of on its own to be the worst, depending on your certain point of view. This video is something of a thought experiment. What happens if we take off the rose-colored nostalgia glasses and look at the film in a different way? Would we see anything or learn anything different about it that we might not have realized? I guess on the subject of thought experiments, I'll quote a franchise that isn't Star Wars. It was one of the Lutece twins from the BioShock series that said, "The mind of the subject will desperately struggle to create memories where none exist." To put that in a Star Wars context, the mind of the viewer will desperately try to make a comparison to a pattern of Star Wars that doesn't necessarily exist. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, as we watch these new films come out, and as we judge this line or that acting moment or that editorial choice, what are we comparing this to? What is our standard? And do we truly hold all the films to it? If The Last Jedi is so bad that it's not a Star Wars film, then I think there's a lot of Star Wars films that aren't Star Wars films. Now, if you didn't like The Last Jedi because of the story choices or the direction it went in, or if the sequel trilogy in general is just not doing well for you, that's fine. That's not really what I'm trying to get at. I'm not trying to have a is The Last Jedi good or bad debate necessarily in this video. I'm not really talking about the fan that just doesn't like the movie. What I'm doing is talking about the fan that somehow thinks the Canto Bight sequence is just objectively more useless than, I don't know, Jabba's palace or the pod race sequence. I also just want to know why it's so darned important, even if that's true. It just goes back to the idea of rigged standards and expectations. I don't know if it's because we're afraid that we'll end up loving a movie that becomes universally panned later, or if it's just something about human nature, but I do know that a movie with worst in the title is statistically more likely to get more views than a video with best in the title. In this day and age, we are the most driven by our anger and by our need for the world to kind of fit into our idea of it. We're surrounded by binaries and absolutes and dichotomies. But if you've ever watched The Empire Strikes Back, then you know that the only thing inside of the caves of life is what we take with us. If we take in anger and disappointment, then that's what we will meet. If you have ever watched The Empire Strikes Back, then you know that if we rush headlong into a fight based on vague and unfolding information and make judgments based on truth we think we've seen, then we're headed right for a trap that could undo everything we've been striving for. And if you've ever watched The Empire Strikes Back, then you know that you can be gut-punched by massive revelations if you keep your focus on a tunnel instead of stepping back and searching your feelings and looking at the bigger picture. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Maybe we should all take a lesson from the worst Star Wars movie. Now, if you're still watching and you didn't completely hate everything, please leave a comment. In fact, if you hated everything, leave a comment anyway. Leave a like or a dislike. Either one makes me equally happy. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Port Haven Forums and visit port-haven.com. And until then, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun.